There is a pattern to global power that almost no one notices until it is too late. It beats every few generations. A currency rises, then it rules. Then it collapses, not because it is attacked or conquered, but because debt becomes heavier than power. Britain learned this in 1944 at Bretton Woods, as the world quietly transferred leadership to the United States. Centuries before, Spain and the Dutch lived the same story. Now, the cycle turns again. The year is 1944, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Delegates from 44 nations gather at the Mount Washington Hotel. The decision they make will reshape the global order for the next 8 decades. The British pound sterling, reserve currency of the world for over a century, is dying. The United States dollar will take its place. Britain's debt to GDP ratio has reached 238%. The cost of 2 world wars has shattered the economic foundation of an empire that once controlled a quarter of the world's landmass and population. The transition is not voluntary. It is inevitable. But this is not a new story. In 1815, Britain itself had assumed reserve currency status from the Dutch guilder. The Netherlands, exhausted by the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War and the Napoleonic conflicts, could no longer maintain the naval power required to protect global trade routes. Their debt had become unsustainable. The baton passed. Before the Dutch, it was Spain. The Spanish Real de Ocho, the famous Peace of Eight, dominated global commerce throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Spanish silver from the mines of Potosi flowed through Europe, Asia, and the Americas. But by the mid-1600s, Spain's military expenditures in the 80 Years' War and the 30 Years' War had created debts that even New World silver could not service. The Dutch guilder rose. Before Spain, Portugal. Before Portugal, the Italian city-states of Venice and Genoa. The pattern repeats. Each transition follows the same trajectory. A rising power possesses 3 critical advantages: the strongest military, the largest trade surplus, and the most trusted currency. These 3 elements reinforce each other. Military strength protects trade routes. Trade surpluses accumulate capital. Capital finances more military power. The system appears unbreakable until it breaks. The United States emerged from World War II holding 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. Fort Knox contained 20,000 metric tons of gold bullion. American factories produced half of the world's manufactured goods. The US economy generated 50% of global GDP. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, provided $13 billion in economic assistance to Western Europe. In today's dollars, that represents approximately $160 billion. This was not charity. It was strategic economic positioning. European nations needed dollars to rebuild. To get dollars, they needed to export to America. To export to America, they needed American capital to restart their factories. The system worked perfectly. By 1950, the United States ran a trade surplus of $1.1 billion. American goods flooded global markets. The dollar, backed by gold at $35 per ounce, became the undisputed global reserve currency. Foreign central banks held dollars because dollars were as good as gold. Better than gold, actually, because dollars paid interest. This is the accumulation phase. The superpower produces more than it consumes. It exports more than it imports. Its currency flows outward, but real goods and capital, the nation saves. It invests, its infrastructure expands, its technology advances. The data from this period is striking. Between 1947 and 1973, real median household income in the United States increased by 74%. Labor productivity grew at 2.8% annually. The manufacturing sector employed 32% of the American workforce. The national savings rate averaged 10%. But something else happens during the accumulation phase. Something subtle, something that plants the seeds of the next transition. As the reserve currency, the dollar becomes the primary medium of international trade. Oil is priced in dollars, commodities are traded in dollars. Foreign governments need dollars to conduct international business. This creates constant demand for dollars, which means the United States can run larger deficits than other nations without facing immediate currency crisis. The exorbitant privilege, as French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called it in 1965. This privilege is a trap. August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon appears on national television at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The announcement lasts 11 minutes. Nixon suspends the convertibility of the dollar to gold. The Bretton Woods system is over. The decision is presented as temporary. It is not. The United States can no longer maintain the $35 per ounce gold peg because foreign central banks have been redeeming dollars for gold at an accelerating rate. Between 1958 and 1971, U.S. gold reserves fell from 20,000 metric tons to 8,100 metric tons. France alone redeemed $191 million in gold in 1965. The math had become impossible. The United States had printed more dollars than it had gold to back them. Foreign governments knew it. Nixon knew it. The game was over. But something remarkable happens next. The dollar does not collapse. Instead, it strengthens its position as the global reserve currency. How? By 1973, the United States had negotiated agreements with Saudi Arabia and other OPEC nations. Oil would be priced exclusively in dollars. Any country wanting to buy oil would need dollars. This created a new foundation for dollar demand, replacing the gold standard with the petroleum standard. The petrodollar system was born, yet the fundamental shift had already occurred. The United States began running persistent trade deficits in 1971. The trade surplus era ended. The consumption phase began. Between 1970 and 1980, U.S. federal debt increased from $370 billion to $908 billion. By 1990, it reached $3.2 trillion. By 2000, $5.6 trillion. By 2010, $13.5 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. As of 2024, U.S. federal debt exceeds $35 trillion. The debt to GDP ratio tells the same story. In 1970, it stood at 35%. Today, it exceeds 120%. This is not unique to America. This is the pattern. Britain's debt to GDP ratio in 1914, before World War I, was 26%. By 1919, it had reached 135%. By 1946, 238%. The empire's economic foundation had disintegrated. The Dutch Republic saw its debt to GDP ratio climb from manageable levels in the early 1700s to over 200% by the 1780s. The cost of maintaining a global maritime empire and fighting successive wars had become unbearable. Spain's debt defaults in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596 marked the decline of Spanish hegemony. Despite controlling the silver mines of the Americas, Spain could not service its debts. Philip II declared bankruptcy 4 times during his reign. The pattern is consistent. The reserve currency power begins to consume more than it produces. Trade deficits become structural. The military expands to protect global interests. But military expenditures accelerate faster than economic growth. Debt accumulates. The currency remains in demand because of its reserve status, which allows the nation to finance larger deficits than would otherwise be possible. This creates a false sense of security. The exorbitant privilege becomes the exorbitant burden. There is a moment in every cycle when the emerging power surpasses the dominant power in a critical metric. Historians can identify this moment only in retrospect, but the data reveals it clearly. In 2014, China's GDP measured by purchasing power parity surpassed that of the United States. By 2024, China's economy, measured in PPP terms, is approximately $34 trillion compared to America's $28 trillion. In 2013, China became the world's largest trading nation, with total trade in goods reaching $4.16 trillion, surpassing the United States at $3.91 trillion. By 2024, China's total trade in goods exceeds $6 trillion annually. In 1990, the United States manufactured 21% of global goods. China manufactured 3%. By 2020, China manufactured 28% of global goods. The United States manufactured 16%. These are not predictions. These are documented facts from the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization. China graduates 4.7 million STEM students annually. The United States graduates approximately 800,000. China has built 45,000 kilometers of high-speed rail since 2008. The United States has built 0 kilometers of true high-speed rail in the same period. China launched 67 orbital space missions in 2023. The United States launched 109, but Chinese launch capacity is growing at 15% annually. China holds $3.2 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. The United States holds $240 billion. But here is the critical detail. The Chinese renminbi represents only 2.7% of global foreign exchange reserves as of 2024. The US dollar represents 58%. This is the lag. This is the gap between economic reality and monetary transition. When Britain's economy was surpassed by the United States in the 1870s, the pound sterling remained the dominant reserve currency for another 70 years. Economic leadership precedes monetary leadership by decades. The transition is slow, then sudden. Reserve currency transitions accelerate during periods of crisis. The First World War accelerated the dollar's rise and the pound's decline. Britain entered the war as the world's creditor. It emerged as a debtor, owing $4.7 billion to the United States. The 2008 financial crisis marked another inflection point. U.S. federal debt increased by $6.1 trillion between 2008 and 2012. As the government bailed out banks and stimulated the economy, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from $870 billion in 2007 to $4.5 trillion by 2015. The COVID-19 pandemic created an even larger fiscal response. Between March and December 2020, the U.S. federal government spent $4.2 trillion on pandemic relief. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded to $8.9 trillion by 2022. Each crisis requires greater intervention. Each intervention creates more debt. Each debt accumulation reduces fiscal flexibility for the next crisis. Meanwhile, China's response to the 2008 crisis was different. China launched a $586 billion stimulus package focused on infrastructure. High-speed rail networks expanded, ports were modernized, cities were connected. The stimulus built productive capacity, not just consumption. This is not a moral judgment. This is an observation about the structural differences between a rising power in accumulation phase and a declining power in consumption phase. The United States must maintain a global military presence to protect the dollar's reserve status. In 2024, the U.S. Department of Defense budget is $842 billion. This does not include veterans benefits, homeland security, or intelligence agencies. Total national security spending exceeds $1.2 trillion annually, representing approximately 4% of GDP. The United States operates approximately 750 military bases in over 80 countries. Maintaining this infrastructure costs an estimated $150 billion per year. China's official defense budget is $236 billion. China operates one foreign military base in Djibouti. The math is simple. The United States spends 5 times more on defense than its primary competitor. This gap must be financed by either taxation or debt U.S. federal tax revenue. In 2024 is approximately $4.9 trillion. Federal spending is approximately $6.8 trillion. The deficit is $1.9 trillion. Interest payments on the national debt are now the fastest growing component of the federal budget. In 2024, net interest payments exceed $870 billion, surpassing defense spending for for the first time since World War II. By 2030, the Congressional Budget Office projects net interest payments will reach $1.4 trillion annually. This is the debt trap. As debt accumulates, interest payments consume a larger share of government revenue. This reduces fiscal capacity for other priorities. The only options are raising taxes, cutting spending, or issuing more debt. Raising taxes slows economic growth. Cutting spending is politically difficult. Issuing more debt accelerates the problem. History shows that superpowers always choose more debt. The erosion of reserve currency status happens through 1,000 small cuts. In 2010, China and Brazil agreed to conduct bilateral trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar. The volume was modest. The precedent was significant. In 2015, China launched the cross-border interbank payment system, a yuan-based alternative to SWIFT, the dollar-dominated international payment system. In 2016, the International Monetary Fund added the Chinese renminbi to its special drawing rights basket, alongside the dollar, euro, yen, and pound. The renminbi's weighting was 10.92%. In 2018, China launched yuan-denominated oil futures contracts on the Shanghai International Energy Exchange. For the first time, oil could be purchased without dollars. In 2020, China and 14 other nations signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the world's largest free trade agreement. Combined, these nations represent 30% of global GDP and 30% of the world's population. The agreement includes provisions for trade in local currencies. In 2023, Brazil and China agreed to settle trade directly in yuan and reais. India and Russia began trading oil in rupees and rubles. Saudi Arabia announced it would accept yuan for oil sales to China. The United Arab Emirates and India established a rupee dirham trade mechanism. Each agreement is small, each represents a fraction of global trade, but the cumulative effect is a gradual reduction in dollar dependency. The data shows the shift. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has declined from 71% in 2000 to 58% in 2024. The decline is steady, approximately 0.5% per year. At this rate, the dollar will fall below 50% by 2040. But history suggests the decline will not be linear. It will be exponential. When confidence in a reserve currency breaks, it breaks quickly. In 1931, Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard after a banking crisis drained its gold reserves. The pound sterling depreciated by 25% within months. International trade in pounds collapsed. The era of sterling dominance ended not with careful transition, but with panic. The markers of late-stage reserve currency dominance are visible today. Persistent trade deficits, rising government debt, growing wealth inequality, financialization of the economy, declining manufacturing base, political polarization, infrastructure decay. In 1970, the financial sector represented 4% of US GDP. Today, it represents 8%. In 1970, manufacturing represented 25% of GDP. Today, it represents 11%. In 1970, the top 1% of Americans held 11% of national wealth. Today, they hold 32%. In 1970, US infrastructure received a grade of B from the American Society of Civil Engineers. In 2021, US infrastructure received a grade of C-. These are symptoms, not causes. The cause is the fundamental mismatch between consumption and production, between spending and earning, between the present and the future. No reserve currency has ever been replaced by a vacuum. The question is not whether the dollar will eventually lose its status, but what will replace it. History provides limited guidance because the modern global economy is unprecedented in scale and complexity. In previous transitions, the emerging reserve currency was backed by a clear military and economic superior. Today, no single alternative commands universal confidence. The euro, launched in 1999, represents 20% of global foreign exchange reserves. But the European Union is not a unified political entity. It lacks a common fiscal policy. The Eurozone debt crisis of 2010 to 2012 revealed structural weaknesses. Greece's debt to GDP ratio reached 180%, Italy's exceeded 135%. Spain's unemployment rate reached 26%. The European Central Bank was forced to implement unprecedented bond buying programs to prevent collapse. The euro lacks the full faith and credit of a sovereign government because the Eurozone is not a sovereign government. The Chinese renminbi faces a different problem: capital controls. The Chinese government restricts the free flow of capital in and out of the country. Individuals are limited to converting $50,000 per year. Corporations face extensive reporting requirements. The renminbi cannot function as a true reserve currency while these controls remain in place. But removing capital controls risks capital flight. If wealthy Chinese citizens and corporations were free to move money abroad without restriction, trillions of dollars might leave China. The Chinese government faces a dilemma: maintaining control limits, internationalization; removing control risks, destabilization. Some economists propose a return to gold. Global gold reserves total approximately 200,000 metric tons. At current prices of approximately $2,000 per ounce, total global gold is worth $12.9 trillion. Global GDP is approximately $100 trillion. There is not enough gold to back global trade at current price levels unless gold prices increase by a factor of 10 or more. Others propose a basket of currencies managed by the IMF through expanded special drawing rights. This solution spreads risk but concentrates power in an international institution with limited accountability. A third alternative has emerged from technology. Cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies represent a potential paradigm shift. Bitcoin's market capitalization exceeded $1 trillion in 2024. Over 100 countries are exploring central bank digital currencies. China launched its digital yuan pilot program in 2020, with transactions exceeding $250 billion by 2023. Digital currencies offer advantages: instant settlement, lower transaction costs, reduced counterparty risk, but they also introduce new vulnerabilities: cyber attacks, programming errors, privacy concerns, government surveillance. The transition to a post-dollar reserve system will likely be messier than previous transitions. It may involve multiple reserve currencies used in different regions or for different purposes. The dollar for energy, the euro for European trade, the yuan for Asian trade, gold or Bitcoin as stores of value. This fragmentation would represent a fundamental restructuring of the global monetary system, potentially returning to a multipolar currency regime not seen since the early 20th century. When a reserve currency loses its status, the consequences are not evenly distributed. For the declining power, the immediate effect is a loss of monetary privilege. The ability to borrow in one's own currency at artificially low interest rates disappears. Foreign creditors demand higher returns to compensate for currency risk. Government borrowing costs increase. This forces fiscal adjustment. Britain's experience is instructive. Between 1945 and 1951, Britain received $4.4 billion in loans from the United States and Canada. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, the United States threatened to dump British bonds unless Britain withdrew from Egypt. Britain complied. The era of British military intervention without American approval ended. By the 1960s, Britain was forced to impose capital controls to prevent currency flight. The pound was devalued from $2.80 to $2.40 in 1967, Britain applied for an IMF loan in 1976, subjected to strict austerity conditions, spending cuts, tax increases, union restrictions. The standard of living declined. In 1950, British GDP per capita was 87% of American GDP per capita. By 1980, it had fallen to 72%. This is not collapse, this is adjustment. The British economy did not disappear. London remained a major financial center, but Britain's ability to project global power, to maintain worldwide commitments, to spend beyond its means, ended. For the rising power, reserve currency status brings enormous benefits, but also creates new vulnerabilities. The currency must be made available to foreign holders. which requires running trade deficits. The nation must maintain political stability and property rights to inspire confidence. It must develop deep financial markets where foreign entities can invest. It must accept that its monetary policy will affect the entire world, and the entire world will scrutinize its every decision. The United States accepted these responsibilities in 1944. The costs seemed manageable when the US economy was 50% of global GDP. They seem less manageable when the US economy is 20% of global GDP. For the rest of the world, reserve currency transitions create uncertainty. Trade relationships are disrupted. Long-term contracts become risky exchange rate volatility increases. Some nations benefit from the new order, others suffer. After the dollar replaced the pound, countries aligned with American interests prospered. Western Europe thrived under the Marshall Plan. Japan grew rapidly with American support. Latin American countries that opposed American interests faced coups and sanctions. The 1971 Nixon shock, when dollar convertibility ended, triggered a decade of inflation and stagnation globally. Oil-importing developing nations were devastated by the combination of dollar devaluation and oil price increases. Debts denominated in dollars became more expensive to service. Many countries defaulted. The next transition will affect 8 billion people, their savings, their debts, their jobs, their governments. The stakes are incomprehensibly large. When will the transition occur? The historical average is 79 years. The dollar became the reserve currency in 1944. 80 years would be 2024, but averages can be misleading. Britain held reserve status for approximately 105 years, the Dutch for approximately 80 years, Spain for roughly 110 years, Portugal for about 70 years. The range suggests that transitions occur anywhere from 7 to 11 decades after achieving dominance. The United States is now in its 8th decade. Certain catalysts can accelerate the timeline: wars, financial crises, political instability, technological disruption. The 2008 financial crisis did not trigger a transition, but it created doubt. The COVID-19 pandemic further strained the system. The next major crisis may be the breaking point. Some indicators suggest acceleration. The federal debt is growing faster than GDP. Net interest payments are becoming unsustainable. Political polarization is increasing. Infrastructure is deteriorating. Trade deficits persist. The manufacturing base continues to shrink. Other indicators suggest resilience. The US military remains unmatched. American technology companies dominate global markets. The dollar still represents 58% of reserves. No clear alternative has emerged. Financial markets remain deep and liquid. The transition could happen in 5 years. It could happen in 30 years. It could be gradual, taking 50 years. The precise timing is unknowable, but the direction is clear. Every empire believes it is different. Every dominant power thinks it has escaped the pattern. The Romans believed their empire would last forever. The Mongols thought their conquests were divinely ordained. The British were certain that the sun would never set on their empire. The Soviets proclaimed that history had ended with communism. They were all wrong. The United States is not immune to the forces that have toppled every previous hegemon. The belief in American exceptionalism is itself a symptom of late-stage dominance. It is the assumption that the rules do not apply, that debt does not matter, that power is permanent. The data suggests otherwise. The 50-year power cycle is not a precise time frame. It is a pattern, a rhythm, a historical tendency. The exact duration varies, but the sequence remains consistent: rise, accumulation, dominance, consumption, decline, transition. We are somewhere in this cycle now. Whether in the consumption phase or the early stages of decline is debatable. What is not debatable is that the United States consumes more than it produces, imports more than it exports, and borrows more than it saves. These trends are unsustainable. Mathematics does not negotiate. Compound interest does not compromise. Debt grows exponentially. Revenue grows linearly. At some point, the lines cross. China is not guaranteed to be the next reserve currency. The renminbi may never achieve that status, but someone will. Some currency will be the next global standard. The world has always had a reserve currency for international trade. That will not change. The question is not whether the dollar will eventually lose its status. The question is what happens when it does. Will the transition be managed carefully through international cooperation and gradual adjustment? Or will it be chaotic, triggered by crisis and marked by conflict? Will a new currency rise smoothly to dominance? Or will we enter a period of monetary fragmentation with no single reserve asset? Will the United States accept a diminished role gracefully? Or will it attempt to maintain dominance through force? Will the emerging power use its new status responsibly? Or will it repeat the mistakes of its predecessors? History suggests that transitions are rarely peaceful. The declining power resists. The rising power pushes. Miscalculation leads to confrontation. Britain and Germany fought 2 world wars, partly because Germany challenged British naval supremacy. The United States and Soviet Union came close to nuclear war during the Cold War China, and the United States are now competing for influence across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The next decade will be critical. The decisions made by policymakers in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and other capitals will determine whether this transition happens peacefully or violently, gradually or suddenly. But the transition is coming. Every superpower falls the same way, through debt, through overextension, through the gap between obligations and resources. The pattern has repeated for 5 centuries. It will repeat again. The only question is what we do with this knowledge. Do we adjust before the crisis, or do we wait until the crisis forces adjustment upon us? Do we build systems that ease the transition, or do we cling to dominance until it is torn from our grasp? Do we learn from history, or do we repeat it? The debt clock in Times Square continues to tick upward. $35 trillion, $36 trillion, $40 trillion. The numbers become abstract, meaningless, too large to comprehend. But compound interest is patient. It does not care about exceptionalism. It does not recognize superpowers. It only knows mathematics, and mathematics always wins.